Hey everybody, welcome back. We're going to continue our discussion on the safety risk management process. If you remember from the previous video, which we're going to go ahead and link up here and in the description, we went through the terminology with ICAO Doc 9859 Safety Management Manual to find hazard, risk escalation, and then the various definition of components. So today what we're going to do is briefly review that to make sure we're all on the same page. And if you need to review that, you can jump back and look at the previous video. Then I want to jump into a visual representation of what the safety risk management process now is for loss of control in flight that establishes it as the #1 threat to air safety. So let's jump in. All right, welcome back. We're going to do a quick review of where we left off in the last video, just to kind of give us perspective as a jumping off point here. So if you take a look at the slides, you can see our escalation from left to right or from now to later, starting with the hazard. And each hazard that's associated with loss of control has a risk of loss of control in flight that propagates over time. And the goal, of course, is to mitigate that before it arrives at the accident. So in this process of discussion, we pulled out 3 definitions from the ICAO manual. We write out the definition of the hazard, an unsafe event, or an ultimate consequence. So on the left, we can see the hazards, and some of the examples we gave is flight control failure, automation mismanagement, complacency, distraction. And as we talked about in the previous discussion, there's over 20 of those hazards, which we're going to look at here in a long list in just a second. But as we move from left to right, the next thing coming up is what's called in this case an unsafe event, which is the airplane upset. Now, good news, bad news is that irrespective of the hazard, the associated risk of it's going towards a fatal accident of loss of control in flight has to go through the window of the airplane up. So it's our last line of defense to recognize and intervene and take action to mitigate the loss of control in flight accident before it happens. Now, as we move all the way to the right, this is the accident we're talking about today, which is loss of control. And by definition from the manual, let's have a look at it. Loss of control in flight represents the ultimate consequence, accident, state, outcome, or risk that is resulting, and that's an important concept, when hazard mitigation and recovery defenses fail. Now, in this discussion, we can see those definitions listed up top, but in this particular threat of loss of control in flight, there's another important concept that lives between the airplane upset and the accident itself. And this is an area where the pilot eventually loses control of the airplane, or more specifically, can no longer affect the fatal outcome of the fatal accident. So that can be due to time, altitude, skills, aerodynamic conditions of the event at that particular time. If you go back to the title, less than 10 seconds to survive loss of control in flight, we talked about the critical window between one envelope and the third envelope, or the existence of 3 or more envelopes simultaneously, the airplane is now truly out of control. So that's an important line, and the reason why I'm bringing attention to it is we have a finite amount of time between the airplane upset to the point where the pilot can no longer avert the fatal accident, and that is critical to understand that. That's why we call the mitigation of loss of control in flight upset prevention and recovery training, because we want to take action at the upset, because loss of control of the fatal accident is too late. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the fact that if you take a look at the top, there's more than just those mitigations in place. I talked about the airplane upset or upset prevention and recovery training being the last mitigation, but remember, it's upset prevention and recovery training, while recovery is the last line of defense. Prevention happens right from the origin of the hazard all the way through to the airplane upset, and that's awareness, recognition, and prevention. And so as we take a look at the safety risk management process, it's important to step back to recognize if we can identify a hazard and eliminate the hazard, by eliminating it, we eliminate the associated risk or the ultimate outcome associated with that hazard. So if we decide never to go flying where there's a thunderstorm, that would be a quick way of eliminating the thunderstorm hazard of the risk of loss of control in flight. But as we look into the list, we're going to see there's a whole lot more than just thunderstorms or distraction associated with loss of control in flight. So let's go ahead and have a look at this now. Let's transfer it into a visual representation. So as we transition into this diagram, we can see the same escalation across the top, the same arrow, LOC-I Risk Escalation Spectrum, but laying along there are the 3 levels of intervention that we have as a pilot. The first level is awareness. The second level is prevention, and the third level is recovery. All of it requires a level of recognition to understand which layer we are in at the time. Now, we talked about hazards. If you look to the left column now, those are the causes of the airplane upset and therefore the causes of loss of control in flight. So as you see, there's more than just one hazard. So for example, if we tried to eliminate distraction, if in fact that would avert a fatal loss of control in flight accident, you can see there's still 20 or more other hazards that have loss of control in flight. So there's no silver bullet associated with eliminating the hazard that's going to stop loss of control in flight from happening. So the funnel that you see from left to right is the propagation of risk through the layers of mitigation represented by the vertical lines, resulting in the fatal loss of control in flight accident, the ultimate outcome or risk on the right-hand side. So along the bottom here, you can see I labeled it layers of safety risk mitigation, and they're kind of terminologies that we see. So have a look at those names. So you can planning and knowledge in that first column beside the hazard list. Then into the first column under prevention, aeronautical decision-making, risk management, flight path management, things we've heard before. The second level of prevention escalation, we have startle, surprise management, threat and error management, and then we have the airplane upset itself with that orange vertical line, and that's kind of loss of airplane state awareness or undesired aircraft state, which is the resulting outcome of ineffective threat and error management as an example. Okay, so the way this works and the way this funnel, this conceptualization really helps people understand the layers of mitigation in place is we take a risk, for example, that's associated with a hazard. So for example, the red dot represents the risk associated with distraction. So let's use distraction as a source of the escalation of risk leading to a fatal loss of control in flight event. So here's what it looks like. We encounter the hazard of distraction, we're focusing on something, but it's the wrong thing, and now the risk starts elevating itself through the layers of mitigation, either insidiously or in a rapid onset escalation like a wake encounter, arriving in the fatal accident. Now, most pilots looking at this diagram for the first time, especially at this point, say, well, come on. Obviously, as a pilot, we're going to see that. It's very obvious that this risk is being elevated and propagating through the layers. But the reality is that we're very busy on every flight. In fact, if you could aggregate your last 10 flights, it would very much look like this, for example, or maybe your last 100 flights, is that we are busy in the cockpit as pilots at every layer of mitigation, detecting, identifying, and mitigating these elevating risks, whatever they might be. Just shown here is the loss of control and flight risk. So as a pilot, conceptually, what we're doing for each of these balloons or bubbles, we're taking our pin and mitigating them by popping them. The red one you can see there happened to get through our defenses unnoticed. And so the one thing I want to bring to your attention here is that vertical orange line that I put on the airplane upset, okay? It's critical to understand no matter what the originating hazard is, the associated risk as it propagates through those layers of mitigation to be mitigated, if it's going to a fatal loss of control and flight event, they all have to go through the airplane upset. So the airplane upset, particularly the recovery phase, is the last line of defense for the pilot to be able to save the airplane. Now, as you go to the right from that orange vertical line, you see now a vertical red line. What that represents is the point at which the pilot can no longer affect the outcome. Remember, we talked about before, due to time, altitude, experience, or whether it's just the aerodynamic condition. So good news, bad news, folks, is this complex layers of mitigation and an understanding of the hazards and the escalating risk, and even a measure of upset prevention and recovery training is in place already. The problem is, folks, is that this system right now is perpetuating loss of control in flight as the #1 threat to air safety. So this video today is just simply understanding this visualization. When we pick this up again in a future video, we're going to start right here and take it forward into the next level of the safety risk management process.